I'm sure that energy that we have, people with will and positive attitude to life, we have also capacity to reinvent ourselves. When you expand your mind, you have a capacity to see more and to solve new problems and challenges and address opportunities.
Politics or the political system is not, as any other system, is not independent, but largely interdependent. So the way we're doing politics today is so context sensitive, where you have environmental conditions which lead to social systems, conditions and structures. And then out of these social structures, we develop our political structures. If any of these change, the political systems change, rather than the political changes anything of the social structure or the environmental structure, which is very interesting in its feedback loops. So, for instance, nowadays we can experience it directly. Unfortunately, when it goes through environmental changes, maybe the climate crisis, but now the pandemics, where our social structures are heavily under pressure. And the pressure is also being responded and reinforced by political systems, to the extent that by some people concerns have been raised very loudly that our complete social fabric, including the political systems, might be not resilient enough and might actually be either heavily harmed or even destroyed in the not too far away future, or even in the present. So this is where I personally also like to distinguish between the questions of governance and politics, and then government. There we need to balance out something like stability, and the other one is agility, and the agility comes with innovation, of course. But it's just, if I would imagine, like me now, this is now more my opinion than scientific fact, if I would imagine all my governmental structures would be constantly agile, would be constantly innovating, would there be any stability for me and then whatever we work in to actually find our meaningful collaborations within a society? If we imagine that people who are in politics are mainly acting upon, let's say, an ideology or anything that you would call a common purpose, partly, but also they are acting on very particular or individual interests, and this has to be taken into account into the system dynamics as well, that there is the opportunity of, let's say, some behavioral change.
Which part of the science in system science can actually help us to manage this complexity in a more sustainable manner, in a sense that is working for the benefit of a broader audience?
When we're dealing with this in a period during which there is great pressures externally as well. So we're looking systemically and say, what are the pressures on humanity now? There are pressures coming externally that we can identify. Some of the pressures are not new. We've been living with them, but reacting very slowly. Things such as climate change. When we're in a framework of such interdependence as a species on a planet, and there is no more new frontier that we can expand into and just say, well, we can let this part of the world, it doesn't matter, slash and burn, those kind of cultures where we can just leave that alone because there's a new frontier where we can go to and develop there. Now, there's a level of true interdependence on our planet. And we're starting to see the limits of this. And this is what the whole movement of sustainability is about, of course. So we can no longer just do whatever we wish on this planet and say, oh, it's okay. Now we're starting to realize there are parameters. Factor one that is very pressuresome and just very recent is, of course, the global pandemic. Another aspect that has brought us into the realization of our fundamental fragility and the fact that we cannot act simply based on our self-interest. Oh, I don't want to wear a mask. I do want to wear a mask. Oh, it's about the collective health And that is something that we're starting to need to address now. And it's still very slow in uptake for people to realize that this is not just whatever I feel is right, but what we must be doing for our collective best interest. It's a shift in perspective in that sense. As Victor Hugo once said, nothing is so powerful as an idea whose time has come. But that means that if you have a great idea, but it's not matching the listening of the public discourse at the time, it won't go anywhere. So finding ways to listen into, to find matches between the ideas for change and then the receptivity of people who need or wish or desire for that kind of change. And Violetta was mentioning that there's a real need for this kind of a thirst for this all around the world. Then finding that match and speaking that language, right? Addressing those value interests. We talked about from stability to agility, but I think there's something else emerging now that people refer to as anti-fragility. And what is anti-fragility? It's beyond agility. So when you're agile, you're able to adapt to change very rapidly as it arises. So in the same moment that some change happens, you're right away flowing with it and finding ways to move with it and adapt to it. But that's different from anti-fragility. In the frameworks of anti-fragility, there's a thriving on chaos. There's a thriving on uncertainty. There's a sense of, oh, look, we don't have a stable system. Excellent. This gives us opportunity to be creative, to grow, to move.
Democracy is not on track. Around 8% of the citizens of the world is living in a stable democracy. Out of the 196 nations which the world consists of, 80 nations have stepped down the democratic ladder during the last year. Only one nation has developed a stronger democratic system. The rest is status quo. So it says a bit about where we are right now. I'm struggling on a daily basis on how to, on one hand, stand up for our democratic institutions, which is under pressure, and at the same time, reinvent them and make them more vital. How to protect what we have? How can we create the future we would like to live in? The old system is dying, but the new system has not been born yet. Some of the dilemmas we are facing right now, we see a lot of decisions are going down to the local city level, and a lot of decisions are going up to regional level, European, in this case, EU level. So the power base, the national state power base, has to get a new identity, so to speak, and figure out a new role.
Where are we citizens in all this?
Our system in the UK prevents any small political party from making any impact whatsoever. So we started to look from a different perspective. And then when we started to look from a different perspective, we actually saw a whole new world of reality and experience around these two questions of where is the power and where is our agency? Only 2% of people are members of political parties. Now, if you think about that's quite extraordinary. Some people would say, oh, it's just not in the, it's not to the taste of people to be involved in politics, but it's much more than that. Only 2% of people think it's worth their time and their money to be invested in this current political system. At the same time, this current political system, the 2%, really create the entire political discourse that our media feeds on. People are the objects, not the subjects of our democracy. Don't read the newspapers for a bit and try to see it from another perspective. What you discover is that people have been themselves going through what can only amount to a revolution for the last 20 years. So over this past 20 years, since the birth of the internet, there has been a massive change in people's experience of the public space. You join Facebook, you're not just meeting friends and having discussions. You're not talking about the mainstream political issues. You're talking about yourselves, you're talking about each other. You're watching yourself perform in the public space. So your own experience of your power and your agency is changing and has been changing rapidly over this past 20 years. We've all been subject to advertising, to propaganda, to manipulation of our minds all of our lives. The most promising changes now are, yes, at the local level, people coming together, in places like cities, for example, or in towns as well. It's not simply cities, meeting each other, building relationships, creating trust, but being in, as Alexander was saying, this cosmo-local reality which the internet offers. If we don't consciously shift our attention and our energies to the thing that we choose to happen in the future, then even this very promising cosmo-local, people coming together, new agency and power will collapse. What is different at the local level or the cosmo-local level and in communities is that people are moving into relationship with each other, they consider things, and they change their minds.
Deeply provocative statements that you made.
Within the 21st century, there won't be a problem with democracy, there will be a problem within democracy. And that is what my generation is facing right now. That doesn't mean that political participation with the youth doesn't exist. It just exists in various forms, which are not politically institutionalized. We believe in grassroots movements, and we see this always as the first step of becoming engaged. Youth engagement usually begins with, being part of a civil society. I think most important is to highlight the protest movements. And we've seen that with Future for Fridays, where, I think she was 14 or 15 at the time, Greta Thunberg, she started a global movement, which means, it's not even about having to have a worldwide network. You don't need to be a politician to do something, to create a change, but it can just be one small girl protesting. But of course, she wouldn't have been picked up had it not been for social media. And this is where, everything ends. Begins and ends with the post-millennial generations. It's hard to keep up with everything that's being done on social media, and digital literacy is becoming very important. And democracy or democracies are now on social media. Means that, we've come to a point where my generation is based on quick fixes. And quick fixes are not enough because they're just hiding prejudice, and it does not match institutional change because it's ineffective, and it disproportionates punishment because it does nothing but create resentment and fear. Post-COVID-19 world will be when my generation will come to the employment market. And we've seen from the 2008 crisis that youth unemployment rises majorly when a crisis happens, and we will have an economic crisis for the next 4 or 5 years. So this will definitely create new trends. And the question is now, how can we have a fruitful debate and continue having a fruitful debate with various actors, with not being in your own bubble, with not being on social media, which creates a bubble for you, but with listening to various voices, to being open to discussions, and to teach also younger generations to be critical thinkers who are also digitally very literate.
A lot of new structures emerging now in the crisis, and really professional structures. And it reflects a little bit that politicians, I feel that I've been feeling that for years, totally underestimate citizens. What I very much support and loved is this, that we come together and consciously decide in this broken system, where do we want to go together?
I'm glad we are finishing with an optimistic note, that there is future emerging and we can co-create it. It's something we need to learn, how to listen and how to respect the different opinions, but still find common denominators that are worth engaging over, and they contribute to a better society.